The date of the 21st presidential election was officially set for June 3rd, following the removal of former President Yoon. It's been designated as a temporary holiday. A day before the U.S. so-called reciprocal tariffs take effect, China vows further retaliation against the U.S. if Washington goes ahead with an additional 50% tariff on Beijing. America's trading partners are scrambling to negotiate, among them being South Korea. Samsung Electronics is estimated to have posted an operating profit of $4.5 billion in the first quarter on the back of strong sales of its flagship smartphones. It's April 8th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. The date of the nation's next presidential election has been officially set for June 3rd. Oh Soo-young covers the protocols ahead for the presidential race.
South Korea will hold an early presidential election on June 3rd, 2 months after the removal of former President Yoon. In a meeting chaired by Acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, Cabinet Ministers on Tuesday confirmed the date of the early election and declared it a temporary holiday to encourage voter turnout. The decision comes 4 days after the Constitutional Court upheld former President Yoon's impeachment over his martial law declaration last year, effectively ousting the nation's 20th president. Under the Constitution, a snap election must be held within 60 days of a presidential vacancy, with a date set within 10 days. While June 3rd is the last possible day to hold the election, it's considered a necessary period of time for sufficient campaigning and preparation. In 2017, following former President Park Geun-hye's removal from office, an election was held 60 days later.
We considered the time required to smoothly execute legally mandated tasks for election management and preparation time for each political party. To ensure citizens can exercise their precious right to vote, we have designated Election Day as a temporary public holiday.
The National Election Commission Tuesday promptly confirmed the election schedule. It will accept candidate registrations on May 10th and 11th before official campaigning starts on the 12th until June 2nd, the day before the vote. Televised interviews and debates hosted by electoral authorities will be held during this time. Overseas Koreans must register to vote 40 days before Election Day, and ballots for them will open from May 20th to 25th at embassies and consulates around the world. Early voting will be held the weekend before, on May 29th and 30th, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. On the official election day, voting hours will be from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. To support a fair and transparent electoral process, the Interior Ministry will operate a fair election support situation room through Election Day. A nationwide mock exam for the November college entrance test has been rescheduled to a day later on June 4th. In an early election, the winner must immediately assume presidential duties without a transmission committee. In the 2017 presidential race, then President-elect Moon Jae-in took office straight after his victory was confirmed on May 10th, the day after ballots were cast. Until the leadership vacuum is filled, Acting President Han told cabinet members they must devote themselves fully to ensuring the safety of the people, restoring livelihoods, and responding to the ongoing trade war triggered by the United States. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
With the date set, a number of presidential hopefuls are making their moves to join the race. Kim Do-yeon reports.
With the next presidential election officially set for June 3rd, eyes are now on who's going to be running in this relatively short election season. The Democratic Party of Korea, which holds the majority on the floor, does have a clear frontrunner, though he's yet to announce his official candidacy. The party's chair, Lee Jae-myung, who lost the last presidential election to Yoon by just 0.7 points, is expected to resign from the party's leadership as early as Wednesday to make a bid for the presidency. Despite this, there are other DP politicians not from East faction who are going to compete for the candidacy. Kim Do-kwan, former Minister of Interior and Governor of Gyeongsang-namdo Province, as well as a lawmaker, said he will run. Kim Dong-yeon, current Governor of Gyeonggi-do Province, announced that he will formally declare on Wednesday as he leaves for the state of Michigan in the U.S. to deal with tariff issues. As for the People Power Party, there is no frontrunner like its rival, and the primary is expected to have around 10 candidates. First up is lawmaker An Cheol-soo, who held an official press conference on Tuesday declaring his fourth run for presidency. Labor Minister Kim Moon-soo resigned from his post on Tuesday and said he will officially start his campaign on Wednesday. Former PPP chair Han Dong-hoon said his camp will kick off on Thursday, while Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo's camp said his official announcement will be on the 14th of April. The two most watched so far are Kim Moon-soo and Han Dong-hoon. Kim famously refused to apologize for the martial law declaration at the National Assembly when all other cabinet members stood up. Han was the chair of PPP and despite being from the party, openly supported the impeachment of President Yoon. Meanwhile, third-party candidates are expected to announce their bids as well. It began with Lee Jun-seok, the new Reform Party chair who was formerly the chair of the PPP, registering as a preliminary candidate already. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
More than 10 North Korean soldiers crossed the military demarcation line at around 5 p.m. on Tuesday at the frontal eastern area of the demilitarized zone. According to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the soldiers retreated after the South Korean military issued warning broadcasts and fired warning shots. The JCS added that the military is closely monitoring the movements of the North Korean forces and is acting in accordance with operational procedures. A day before the U.S. so-called reciprocal tariffs take effect, Washington and Beijing look to be engaged in a game of chicken, each vowing to retaliate without backing down. China vows further retaliation if the U.S. goes ahead with an additional tariff. Moon Hae-ryun explains.
China is threatening further retaliation against the United States should they impose the additional tariff promised by U.S. President Donald Trump. According to the Wall Street Journal, a statement from Beijing's Ministry of Commerce on Tuesday said that it would take countermeasures to safeguard its own rights and interests in response to Trump's social media post which said Washington could impose an additional 50% tariff on Beijing. The statement called the move a mistake on top of a mistake. Previously, China announced a 34% tariff on American goods in response to U.S. levies, which in turn led to Trump's threat of additional tariffs unless Beijing withdraws these retaliatory tariffs. The escalation of the trade war between the two countries brings the total rate to be levied on Chinese imports to 104%. This is expected to have a staggering impact as China was the second largest trading partner with the U.S. last year. Trump also warns that unless Beijing accepts his demands, its negotiations with the U.S. will come to a standstill. Meanwhile, negotiations with other countries are due to begin immediately. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said more than 50 countries reached out for talks, while Trump said leaders from Asia and Europe called him over the weekend, as well as Japan's Prime Minister on Monday.
We have many countries that are coming to negotiate deals with us, and they're going to be fair deals, and in certain cases they're going to be paying substantial tariffs. There'll be fair deals.
This marks a shift from earlier statements, which stated that there would be no negotiations for the time being. During interviews with various media outlets, White House officials said that such deals would need to be really great for American manufacturing and farmers, and countries would need to do more than just lowering their tariffs for relief. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, countries in Europe and Asia are gearing up different responses, including negotiations with Washington. An Sung-jin takes a look at how the world is tackling the trade war triggered by the U.S.
As Trump's tariffs threaten countries around the world, most have been drafting response measures. Trump's taxes will start with a baseline of 10% on all goods coming into the U.S., with some countries reaching up to 50% on imports. With the reciprocal tariffs on specific countries to begin on April 9th, countries have been ramping up retaliatory measures. Trump has imposed a 20% tariff on goods from the European Union, which stated that it will be defending its interests with countermeasures.
Further diversifying our trade relations is very critical for us because this broadens the market opportunities and is crucial for our companies. So it's very clear that we are open for negotiations, and that in parallel we are preparing a potential list for retaliation and other measures for retaliation if this is necessary.
The 27-country bloc will also be working closely with the UK, and though it has levied 25% tariffs on some US imports, it further made clear that it would prefer a negotiated solution by offering a 0-for-0 tariff deal. Asian countries have also varied in their approach to tariff impositions. U.S. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had a 25-minute phone talk on Monday, with the Japanese leader stating that he will dispatch a team for further trade talks. However, Ishiba did voice his disappointment over the tariffs as he noted that Japan had been the biggest investor in the U.S. for 5 straight years. Meanwhile, Vietnam took a conciliatory approach by suggesting it could lower tariffs on U.S. goods to 0, while Malaysia will be drafting a joint response plan at the ASEAN level. Pakistan will be sending representatives to the U.S. for discussions, and the Philippines has also pledged to lower taxes on American imports. However, some countries have also stated that they do not plan to retaliate. India referred to ongoing trade negotiations as it expressed no retaliation efforts, while Taiwan also disclosed no intention for reciprocal trade tariffs as of now against the 32% on Taiwanese goods. The U.S. National Economic Council director said more than 50 countries have reached out to the White House to negotiate trade talks with Washington. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Against this backdrop, a Korean trade delegation led by its trade minister has departed for the U.S. with its intentions to address the 25% American tariff on Korean imports. Park Jun-han has more.
Trade Minister Chung In-kyo traveled to Washington on Tuesday to discuss tariffs imposed by the U.S. on South Korean products. Chung will meet U.S. trade representatives in Washington and emphasized that the 25% tariffs affecting steel and automobiles would be the subject of talks during his visit.
So we are trying to use multiple channels to solve the tariffs issue with the United States and to come up with a trade policy outcome that will maximize South Korea's national interests.
This is the first visit by a South Korean government official to the U.S. since Trump announced his detailed reciprocal tariffs plan on April 2nd. Regarding South Korea's stance on U.S. trade policy, Chung said the cabinet has been discussing the possibility of increasing imports from the United States, such as Alaskan liquefied natural gas. The move is aimed at addressing the trade imbalance that Trump has repeatedly raised.
I think as long as Korea will be willing to provide some concessions to the United States, that we could reduce the tariff rate from 25% to 15% or 10%.
At a ministerial meeting on economic affairs, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok outlined a plan to create a supplementary budget to combat issues related to trade and AI. Choi said the government is planning to spend 3 to 4 trillion won, about $2.04 to $2.72 billion, to respond to rapid changes in the trade environment and enhance AI competitiveness. Choi also called on the National Assembly to swiftly approve the budget, emphasizing the need to seize this critical window to save South Korea's industries and businesses. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
As U.S. tariffs rattle global financial markets, the South Korean currency lost substantial ground against the U.S. dollar, weakening to 1,473 won at one point during trade on Tuesday afternoon. This is the one's weakest level against the greenback since the global financial crisis. Accordingly, at an emergency meeting of the country's top economic officials, convened by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, authorities acknowledged the vulnerability of the local financial market to external risk factors and agreed to remain vigilant in anticipation of further fluctuations. For the 22nd month in a row, Korea's current account remained in the black, with a surplus of over $7 billion in February. Lee Soo-jin covers the latest findings.
South Korea's current account stayed in the black for the 22nd month in a row in February. According to data from the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the country logged a near $7.2 billion current account surplus in the second month of the year. This also marks a sharp increase from January's surplus when there were fewer working days on account of the Lunar New Year holiday. It comes as the goods balance, which tracks exports and imports of products and accounts for the largest portion of the current account, recorded an $8.2 billion surplus, also marking a significant increase from the previous month. This extends the surplus streak for the goods balance to 23 consecutive months. Exports rose 3.6% compared to the previous year on strong demand for computers, pharmaceuticals, cars, and IT equipment. But outbound shipments of chips dropped compared to the previous year, a decline recorded for the first time since October 2023.
Exports of lower-value DDR4 memory chips fell slightly in February due to price drops, but picked up again in March despite competition from China. Still, it's something we'll need to watch closely.
The size of the country's service balance once again remained in the red, with a deficit deepening compared to the previous month. This was mostly due to the larger shortfall in the intellectual property account from increased payments by domestic firms to overseas companies for R&D-related royalty fees. When asked about when the impact of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs will be felt, the same official said the current account surplus will likely continue through March, with effects starting to show in April, but that while sectors like autos and auto parts will be affected, the impact is expected to be gradual, not immediate. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
In the corporate arena, Samsung Electronics posted what pundits are calling a resilient first quarter profit, on the back of strong semiconductor and smartphone demand. Shin Se-byuk has more.
Samsung Electronics, in its earnings guidance on Tuesday, estimated a first quarter operating profit of 6.6 trillion Korean won, or roughly $4.5 billion. The figure beats market expectations of around $3.5 billion, thanks to strong sales of the tech giant's latest flagship smartphones, despite being down 0.15% from a year earlier. The market had projected weaker earnings due to delayed shipments of its 5th-gen HBM chips and falling memory prices, but brisk sales of the Galaxy S25, launched in February, pushed results well above forecasts. Stronger than expected DRAM shipments also contributed to the upbeat performance. Revenue rose nearly 10% on year to 79 trillion won, or around $54 billion, close to the all-time high of 79.1 trillion won posted in the third quarter of last year. Samsung did not disclose earnings by business division this time. However, market watchers estimate the MX division, which oversees smartphones, posted an operating profit of over $2.7 billion. The Device Solutions division, responsible for semiconductors, is projected to have logged an operating profit of around $681 million. With memory chip prices on the rise, expectations are growing for Samsung's performance in the coming quarters. But an expert warns that uncertainties remain.
Because of the tariff and because of the uncertainty and because of the slowing down of American economy, I think performances for the second quarter would not be as dramatic as first quarter, and possibly significantly lower than the first quarter.
The company's final earnings report will be released later this month. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
The Foreign Ministry has launched a protest against Japan's false claim over South Korea's Dokdo Island. The protest follows Japan laying claim to Dokdo in its diplomatic blue book released on Tuesday. In response, the Foreign Ministry called in Taisuke Mibae, deputy head of mission at the Japanese embassy here in Seoul, to share its displeasure. In a separate statement, the ministry also stressed that Dokdo is South Korean territory, historically, geographically, and under international law, and that the government would respond firmly to any false claim over the island. Korea will provide an additional $2 million worth of urgent relief items to Myanmar, to aid its recovery after the recent deadly earthquake there. According to the Foreign Ministry, the items will include 500 camping tents for the displaced, 4,000 water bottles, and 80,000 blankets. This follows Seoul's initial $2 million worth of humanitarian assistance sent last week through the International Committee of the Red Cross. More than 10 days have passed since the massive quake, and as of Tuesday, the death toll stands at around 3,600. It is warm enough for the cherry blossoms to bloom. Seoul rose up to 19 degrees Celsius, and Yangsan in Gyeongsangnam-do province was as warm as 25 degrees Celsius today. It will continue to be warm tomorrow, with Seoul rising up to 18 degrees. The daily temperature difference will stay wide as well. Meanwhile, dry weather advisories are spreading. Dry weather advisories are in place in some parts of Gyeongsang-do provinces, southern parts of Chungcheongbuk-do province, eastern parts of Jeollado provinces, and the mountainous areas of Jeju Island. In addition, strong winds of more than 50 meters per second are blowing throughout the country. Please take extra precautions. Tomorrow's Seoul will start off at 8 degrees, Gyeongju at 5 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 19 degrees in Chuncheon, 22 degrees in Daejeon and Jeju. Starting from western parts of the country tomorrow afternoon, rain is forecast across the country tomorrow night. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.